In 1865, just as the war between the Union and the Confederacy was about to end, an estimated 620,000 Americans had died, 20,000 of them women. These women had fought for victory in several different ways, such as spying, aiding as nurses in battlefields, telegraphers, soldiers, factory workers, and many more. Most of these women had risked family, life, and their time to save their fellow Americans fighting in the war.
Before the war, most women in the North did housework such as cleaning, babysitting, sewing clothes, making hats, working in shops, and fulfilling the usual duties of housewives and mothers. But that would change.
On April 12, 1861, a local Minnesota newspaper, a headline screamed, "The war begun." Those simple words would change the lives of Americans forever. The Civil War was a battle between the North and the South, the Union and the Confederates. Fathers, brothers, workers, and sons fled to the fields to defend their states, while their wives and sisters stayed behind.
Without their male relatives, the women were forced to rely on themselves in order to survive. They worked in the fields and plantations along with their children. Desperate for money, many of them looked for jobs like being a telegrapher or serving as a nurse in military hospitals. Sometimes they risked their own lives by going to the battlefield itself to rescue wounded soldiers and to look for their own husbands.
Constance Carey, who became a nurse, once said, "During the night began, the ghostly processions of wounded brought in from the field." A certain woman named Clara Barton, meanwhile, had organized nursing programs for Northern armies. She went to begin the American branch of the Red Cross.
Besides being nurses and doctors, women who wanted to be safer came to factories to make clothes and uniforms for soldiers or rolled bandages for the injured. Some decided to become critics in abolitionist newspapers and became active within the social, political, and economic industry instead.
There were also a dark side of many women's attempts of helping in the Civil War. Confederate women suffered whenever Union armies invaded their houses and seized their properties. They were forced to flee their homes and became fugitives in order to save themselves. Not only were the women and their children lost, they had to struggle to stay alive.
Some women were brave enough to risk their lives for their land, and some for the justice of their husbands and male relatives in the battlefields. Over 400 women had attempted to join both the Union and Confederate Army within the years of the Civil War. Although many kept their real gender a secret by disguising themselves as males, the Army didn't really care as long as the amount of fighters would not decrease.
Women like Emma Edmonds joined the Army in 1861 in the Michigan Volunteer Infantry, had crossed the Southern line and fought at least 11 times as a front-line soldier. She also became a spy for the Union Army and had disguised herself at least 5 times under different names to save her land.
Another woman soldier named Jenny Hodgers, registered under the name Albert D.J. Cashier, was enlisted in the 95th Illinois Infantry and fought 40 times before the Civil War finally ended. She had been known to the public her whole life as an adult man.
Other females who decided not to battle in and out the fields but still wanted the adventure became spies instead. Elizabeth Wanloo of Virginia had been rewarded the position of postmaster of Richmond after sending messages to the Union from the Union prisoners Elizabeth knew. These prisoners were held by the Confederates, and therefore they tracked down every movement available by their enemies.
In 1861, Belle Boyd became a spy for the Confederates through carrying in significant letters and messages by different sergeants and papers across the enemy's lines. The year after that, she was arrested in Washington and charged for espionage. Her famous quotes include, "Sir, if it's a crime to love the South, its a cause and its president, then I'm a criminal," she declared.
Another famous benefactor of freedom was Harriet Tubman. For over 10 years, she rescued at least 300 slaves in South Carolina through the Underground Railroad. that she knew very well. The former nurse recruited slaves who reported on the Confederate movements, and she, along with some black soldiers and a colonel, sailed for a gunboat raid in South Carolina and surprised their enemies along the way. Some slaves recalled Tubman saying, "You either will be free or die a slave."
20,000 women had sacrificed their own lives fighting in the Civil War. They shed blood, toiled and labored on the fields, sent secret messages, and learned to heal the wounded in battle. All of these women had their lives in jeopardy as they chose to defend their land.
Mothers, daughters, sisters, young or old, the war didn't care, and these families fought to be a part of one of the most significant time in history in the United States.